that maximizes the defensive capabilities. And so, again, another way that you can do well at defending is you can arc dodge. So that, second best way to defend if you can't kill a ship is to just not let that ship shoot at you in the first place and have a shot back. But eventually, you do have to rely on the dice. So one of the things that, let's see, we'll talk a little bit more about the dice in a little bit, and it kind of as we go, the dice will keep coming back. But I want to impress that, when you look over time, if you look back, we've got a long history now of over 2 years of people playing this game. A lot of the same people have been playing this game, and you see them kind of showing up in all the regional lists. At the top, they're winning store championships. They're coming in top 8 at regionals. They're coming in top 16 at worlds year after year. So there is a luck piece to this, but clearly there is a skill component to this, or else the same people wouldn't keep showing up year after year. So that's really what we're trying to get at today is how do you build lists? How do you fly? Piloting is a huge part of this game, obviously. How do you judge distances as you are flying? And really, how do you set yourself up round after round after round so that you have optimal situations when the dice end up having, when you got to roll to attack or you got to roll to defend, creating more situations for yourself that are optimal so that you have a chance on 4 dice, when you're attacking to just kill something or to defend well. And so putting yourself in those situations is really a big part of mitigating the dice in this game. It is about the dice in a sense because you're rolling dice, but the best players know how to set themselves up so that they're putting themselves range-wise. If they're going to get shot at, what range do I want to get shot at and return fire from, depending on my squad. I'm going to try and pilot to make that happen so that the dice are the odds are in my favor. Weird things happen. Just on Tuesday of this week, I was shooting a Hawk primary weapon range 3 at Sunterfell with stealth device, and it did not have auto thrusters. Was the only reason I had a chance. Rolled 6 blanks the first time that I shot at, and it was through an asteroid. And so these things happen, right? But over time, over the course of today's tournament, over the course of several tournaments, as you get better at piloting, then that luck thing tends to even itself out, and you have good streaks too, where there's games, hopefully you've all had the chance to experience this. There's certainly games that I didn't deserve to win, but the dice got me there. I made piloting errors, and the dice got me there anyway. And so it swings both ways, but you want to put yourself in optimal positions. Piloting is really critical in terms of mitigating the luck factor of this game. So let's talk about piloting. First things first, piloting requires in this game that you are able to judge distances really well on the map. You've got to be able to eyeball so much in this game and just get it just right as you're getting around that asteroid. As you're trying to judge, am I going to be in range 2 or range 3? Am I going to run into this ship in front of me or not? Am I going to be able to block effectively or not? And so piloting is really important in this game. And so just I want to show you the basics, and some of you have got this down cold, but I want to make sure everybody's got a good level set to begin with. Some basic piloting. Generally speaking, and there's always exceptions to rules in this game, but generally speaking, if you're setting up 3 ships in a line like this example, you want to have your lowest pilot skill on the inside, and then the middle pilot skill, and then the higher pilot skill. The reason you want to do that is so that as you are turning, you don't have to move this guy first and then accidentally run into your, depending on what moves you do, depending on whether you want to keep yourself open for a barrel roll, it's generally advantageous to do it from low pilot skill to high pilot skill. Same thing in terms of forwards and backwards. You want your low pilot skill guys to move, because they're going to move first. You want them to be in front of your higher pilot skill guys. Now, how do you set up your ships so that you won't run into each other? There's lots of ways to do this, but generally speaking, when you are trying to set up your squad, ship placement, initial ship placement, you want to think about. Okay, so you want to, especially when you're flying, the more ships that you're flying, generally speaking, your goal is focused fire. Generally speaking, when you're flying one squad versus another, there's exceptions like the two-ship rules, where you've got dash and core and horn, maybe splitting the fire in that case. There's like I said, there's exceptions to every rule, but generally speaking, if you are flying 4 or more ships, even three ships against your opponent, you want to focus something down because, again, the best defense is to just kill it to begin with. And so to help yourself focus fire, you want to have your ships, when you're flying them in a pack like this, as close as possible without running into each other, so that they will be in the same, so that they'll have the same arcs as you're piloting, and so that they won't run into each other, and so that they're in the same range band, ideally. So if you want to really get a lot of attack dice in your Alpha Strike, you don't want your guys, generally speaking, to be at range, some at range 3 and some at range 2, unless you want your opponent. If you want your opponent to shoot at the guys that are in range 2, then put them in range 2, because it's going to be the easier shot. It's more likely your opponent will take that shot. But ideally, you want your pack to be moving in, so that they're in the same range band for the Alpha Strike, and ideally for other shots as well, so that they can focus fire from the same range. And so that means you want to keep your ships as close together as possible. And so my preferred method to do that, I see people that use the one template and kind of put it between here and use that to space them. I see, and then they put them, one directly behind one another, and that's fine. You probably won't run into each other if you do that. When you do banks, because of the fact that you're turning a square into a diamond as you move it roughly 45 degrees, when you put them directly one behind one another, it becomes a little bit easier to run into each other. And the closer you put them together, the more likely it is that they're going to bump when you start moving them. So it's a balancing act to find that spot where they're far enough apart and they're staggered correctly, so that you are not going to run into each other and you're going to maintain your actions, but at the same time you're going to be able to focus that fire and have them fairly close together. So my preferred method, and I'd love to hear if anybody else has other methods that they have found success with. I set my first ship up, I use my range 1 template, and I set it so that this edge is on the cardboard, is lined up with the cardboard, not the plastic of the first ship. And then the ship next to it, I set it up so that the other edge is lined up with the plastic. So it's a little bit wider than the one. That will fit in there nicely, actually. And there's a little bit of room to spare. But I find that makes it so that no matter what move I use as I'm trying to stay in formation, it stays in formation and I don't run into myself. It also gives me a little bit of mistake room. So, I don't know about you, but every once in a while, my hands get a little shaky, or as I'm moving my hand out from placing a token or something, I bump a ship, right? And so you put it back as best as you can, but it's not exact. So this gives you a little bit of mistake room as well, if those situations happen. Because what you absolutely don't want is to be flying a Howl Runner swarm and have Howl Runner run into somebody and lose their focus or their evade, because guess who's dying that turn. So then this is where I line up the front ships. The back row, I line up behind. So the leftmost peg, I will line up with the rightmost peg of the ship in front of it, or depending on where I want my ships, I can do the reverse. I can do the rightmost peg with the leftmost peg of the ship in front of it. Either way is fine, but what that does for me is that when I now turn, it's going to give me a safe distance that I will just slot in to where I want to be and not run into the other ships. But so you can see I've got it's not even, I don't know if it's even half of one of these distance between. It's about that, but that's enough distance that if there's always a little bit of give between the two pegs as you're setting your template in there. And so if you've ever noticed, like, what am I doing wrong? Because I'm only doing like 2 forward every turn, but my ships are starting to get out of alignment. Part of that is probably because there's that little bit of give, and so over time, that can actually move your ships in one way or the other quite a bit and out of alignment from your squad. So when I move like that, I didn't run into each other. I've still got enough wiggle room, but I'm really good in terms of being in the right range band, being all in the same range band. This is a pretty tight formation, and I don't have to worry. My mind is at ease about running into my own guys. All right, so how do you judge distance using everything that's on the board? Because that's really what's critical. First of all, let's talk about, in order to judge distance, you need a unit of measurement. My preferred unit of measurement is a one base, a small base. It's half of a large base. It's roughly a 1 speed forward. It's not exactly the same, but it's close enough to use. By the way, that's also a good point. So if you want to be really precise, because there is a little bit of difference, the 1 speed is slightly smaller than the small base. When you're marking a ship so that you've got a ship back here that's doing a move through it, and you want to mark a ship, take it off, do your move, and then put your ship back, I recommend that you pick which I'm going to line this up with the back, and then move this, and then put it back so that it is the back of the ship is aligned with the back of the template. That way, it's as close as possible to exactly where I picked it up from. Seems like a small thing, but this game is all about small things. How many times have you it's too close to call, range 3 or out of fire? And so millimeters matter in this game. All right. So using this as a unit of measurement, we now know that this is 1 small base, so then the forwards are pretty easy to then begin to eyeball. Do I have, especially if I'm flying in formation, now I know, this is roughly, the 1 speed is roughly 2.5 small bases. So if I can gauge that, then I know that I can move 2 forward safely and be in front of this guy by half a base. The 5 speed and range 2, same distance. So why is that helpful? I mean, it's helpful for eyeballing. If you in the last round were doing some measurements and some shots, and you found that something was just in range 2, or you saw where it was in that range band, then you can immediately gauge, if you're flying right towards it, well, will a 5 forward fit there or not? What will fit within that space based on the measurements that I was doing in the last round. That's totally legal. Don't abuse it, but it's totally legal, within the confines of what's legal to measure for in this game. There's a little bit of confusion about that too, so I should probably touch on that. So when is it legal to measure? And this is, a lot of this is tournament context. So when you're playing at home, there's always the kind of house rules, if you will. But in terms of the tournament context, you are allowed to measure whenever you need to measure for a special ability. So I need to measure to see if Hal Renner is in range 1 of the guy that I'm firing with, to see if I have her special ability, for example. During the activation phase, when you're moving, you can measure using the range ruler to see if you can take a target lock. If you can take a target lock on the ship you measure on, you must take a target lock. You can measure when it's this ship's turn. This ship can measure against all of the other potential targets to see which one it wants to attack before declaring its target. But only that active ship can do that. I think that's good enough. Anything else? Yeah. All right.
Do you do that for your swords? Like, do you measure with one and take a target lock with one so that you can get an idea for the rest of the swarm?
I mean, so you can. Well, first of all, my TIE swarms can't take target locks, but if you were running a Z95 swarm, then as long if it's the first one that moved and it's its turn to take an action, then you can measure to see if you take a target lock, and then you kind of have an idea of what is likely for the other guys to be able to do, but you still can't measure from those other guys until it's their turn to take an action.
I just wasn't sure if that was something people do.
Yeah, and you'll see some people. This is kind of borderline. It's perfectly legal, but people are so. If I'm flying Dash Rendar with engine upgrade, and I want to see, I'm thinking about, am I in the right range that I want to be in? Am I going to be able to shoot at this thing or not? Do I want to boost or barrel roll or not? One thing I could do, even if it's kind of clear that I'm not in range 3, I can still measure and see range 3 within my rights. And then if it's not, then I don't have to take that target lock, and then I can do a different action. If you're wrong, then you have to take the target lock and then deal with the consequences. But it's kind of frowned upon. I know a lot of players that don't like it, but it is within. It's legal. Yep.
I know this just popped in my head. I know this is off topic, but barrel rolling with large ships.
Yeah.
I'm curious about how that's supposed to play.
Yeah. Okay. So barrel rolling with a small ship, first of all, is. You can set the template up. So first of all, I declare which direction I'm going to try and barrel roll in. And so I set the template up. It can start anywhere along this side of the base that I've declared, as long as my template doesn't go beyond the base. And then I can move it, again, anywhere along that placement once I've set the placement. If there is no legal place for me to barrel roll, because there's a ship in my way or whatever, then I take my barrel roll up and I can pick another action.
Even if you can barrel the other side?
Right. It's direction specific. And so the same thing for boost. If I try and boost in this direction and I can't, then I come back and I can take another action of any kind. I can barrel roll, I can focus, whatever. I can boost in the different direction.
For the barrel roll.
Yep.
You said it's direction specific.
Yep.
Can you move it forward and back as much as you want, trying to figure out exactly where you want to go on that side?
Until the point where you start moving. And then, generally speaking, if I think that's the way you're supposed to do it. If you want to come back and say, I'm actually want to go backwards now.
You can't go back.
Yeah.
You can't go back.
You can't go back.
The minute
right.
you pick up the ship to move to the other side, you're not allowed to go back. If you can fit.
Right.
If you can't fit, that's a different story.
So I will say that in regionals, worlds, an environment like that, I would very kindly not let somebody do that. If it's just casual tournaments or something like that, whatever. That's kind of one of those. It's like somebody forgetting to focus in my mind. Whatever. As long as when things change is when you gain an advantage knowledge-wise by doing something different. So when you move out of order, for example, then suddenly barrel rolls are all screwed up. Or if I move a ship, if you move a ship before and I should have moved first, then there's weird advantages that come into play, and so we've got to back it up. And so large base barrel rolls. You set the template up on its side instead of straight, but it's otherwise the same. You slide it anywhere along, and then once you have decided you're going to commit, then you can do this, and then you can slide it anywhere along. Right? Really, in my mind, the reason that you can't go back is it's really hard to go back to exactly where you were. Once you've committed, it's kind of committed. All right, and then, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I heard something like, someone was mentioning me, like the ship turns a little bit in the direction.
I don't know.
Yeah, maybe, so the Echo or Lieutenant Lieutenant Lareer.
That goes on keep looking.
Right, but there's a TIE interceptor pilot that can do a barrel roll using the one bank, and then so in his case he has to declare the direction and forwards or backwards when he tries his barrel roll.
I don't know if we were going to cover this yet,
Yeah.
but do you want to talk about the distance of the bank turns versus the straights?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we've talked about straights. Let's take a look at, so first of all, just general rule of thumb. I don't know if you've done a one forward and then decided, well, a one bank isn't really going to be that much farther. I've probably got room for that. And you learn pretty quickly, actually a one bank is quite a bit farther than a one straight. And that trend continues as you go up the template chain. And then so I'm going to line these up here. So you can see that a one, let me put a guy in here, a one straight, make sure these are lined up, versus a one bank, you get a little bit more than a full template over from the far side of your original position, right? Or another way to look at it, just depending on what makes sense to your eyes, is it's not quite the width of a template. In fact, it's probably really close to a width of a range template difference from the width, the room you're going to move over from this point to this point. So the space amount between here and here, which is important for gauging. And the other thing is,
You said that back up.
oh, yep, it's really roughly one over from your original position. So, yep. So when you move from your original position, look at one over, and that's where you're going to be lined up this wise.
Like a two straight with a barrel roll distance, that range.
Two straight with a barrel roll. Let's see that. No, it's going to be farther.
Because whenever you use a range, remember to add one
Right.
additional for that to make sure.
That's right.
So could you imagine like if you're doing like a one right, it's like 1.5 space, and then two is 2.
I mean, it's not exact, but it helps. I mean, and it goes farther, the bigger the template. So this goes about 1.5 speed, and then a 3 goes almost a full 2. Turns. You got them?
I have the exact measurement.
Awesome, excellent. Let's throw those into the video maybe later. Yeah. Okay, and then, all right, so turns. My favorite trick with turns is the 3 turn, because this is the one that I'm always trying to, it seems like I'm always trying to just barely clear that asteroid with my 3, right? And so when I set my ship up, and I want to see if I'm going to clear with my 3, where's my ship going to end up on this side? That 3 is just about exactly from the point of the template here to the point of the template lined up where my ship's going to end up. 2 and 2. So if you can eyeball 2 forward and then 2 over here, then you're going to get really close to where you're going to be. And I just, this is a unit of measurement because it's the same as a large base. I just get, you get better and better at these smaller units of measurement. So I like to find tricks where I can use them to my advantage that way. Yeah, yeah. Yep.
So a 2 base can roughly fit in that space. Yeah, can you put a 2 base in there?
Yeah.
I think once you've accepted Tice for who he is,
And this is like dubbed it up.
Yep.
Now if you're using a bigger ship and you're doing a 3 right turn, it's going to be different.
It is different. So, yeah, let's talk about that. Anybody got it? Can I? Yep, thanks. Okay, yeah, let's use the actual. Awesome, thank you. All right, so for a large base ship, let me set it up here. So the large base ship is going to move roughly. So a small base ship fits in a little bit corner to corner. So maybe not even 1.5, 1.25 small base ships will fit in there. But if I know that I can fit a small base ship in there, then I know that I'm good. Yep.
So if you're bumping a small base ship, you know you're going to clear.
Yes.
It's the corners that really get you.
Yeah. Right. So the one thing that a lot of people get tripped up on at first is the 1-speed turn on a large base does not clear your original position. It's super tight. There's actually plastic overlap that happens in the corners. So that's one of the easiest ones, once you know that, to gauge whether you're going to be able to get over the asteroid or not. If this thing is lined up so it's even just barely beyond this guy's base, I'm not going to clear it when I turn.
So you actually move like back and then over a little bit?
Yeah, it's not much overlap, but it's basically the corner, the plastic corner. It creates a sort of plastic square, if you can envision that. And then a 2 is kind of in between those, so a 2. Yep. Yep, and yeah, about the width of a template. Yep. Okay. All right. So let's see. Other things about judging distance using everything on the board. Asteroid placement. So if you place an asteroid that's exactly 2 away from the edge, and your ship is here, and you're trying to figure out if you're going to be able to do a K-turn or not. Again, one thing I know about this game is that a 2 from the edge is exactly the same as 5 speed from the edge. And this is 5 small bases, or 2.5 large bases. So then I know that I can clear with a 4K, because 4 plus the length of my small base is 5, and I know that that's more than 5. Same thing with a large base, same concept. People get really freaked out. Oh, so let's do this. This is an often missed rule.
I know exactly.
If I'm here, there are several legal moves that get me so that I'm still in good shape, as long as I angled that right. Basically, the rule is your template can leave the edge of the game as long as your ship ends up fully on the board at the end of the move. You're still safe. You did not fly off. All right, so going back to judging distance, any other tips that people have found judging distance? Eyeballing things? I haven't figured out any use to it yet, but it's kind of interesting that if you take the 2-speed and the 1 bank, 2-turn 1 bank, and take the 1 bank on the outer edge, it's exactly 2 1 banks. So I'm still trying to figure out how to work that into my game. Let's do that. So assuming the ships have those capabilities, which TIE fighters limitedly do not, then if you want to keep your ships lined up with one another, then yes, you don't want to. If you do the same speed turn, that's fine as long as you put enough space in between them. But then you're going to have one guy that's like range 3, one that's what's more in the range 2 band, one that's really farther up in the range 2 band. If your enemy is coming like this, so if you want to have them all in the same range, then your innermost one is going to do the 1-speed bank. Okay. Two speed. And 3 speed.
Like I missed something. I didn't miss a book somewhere, did I?
And now they're pretty well lined up within the same range band to take your shots.
Would it be the same thing with right turns?
So no. So let's line these back up. So if you've got 2 ships, then you can do a 1 bank, or 1 turn rather. If you try to do a 2 turn with this ship, it'll bump. So a 3 will actually line it up pretty nicely. If you've got one of the things that I like to, if I know that I really want to do that, then and I've got 3 ships in a row like this, then my first move, I'm gonna move these guys 2. And then I'm going to move the last guy 3. And now I'm okay. Because now this guy can do a 1, and then 3-3. They're probably not, formation-wise exactly where you want them to be, but you can do it and not bump.
So if you're flying your cluster 4 formation, though, same thing. You could do. Your guys are lined up a 1-1 and a 3-3, like in sequence.
Let's do that. I'm going to assume they're not offset, because this is how a lot of people tend to fly their ships. So 1, you'll see the problem. 1. This guy's fine. He can do a 1. This guy's host.
So then would probably be better to do
just a 1.
He can do a 1, yeah, and then you'd be there.
You'd be right there.
You'd be fine.
If you do a 2, you end up in the middle of the back, because that's how I held it.
Yeah.
If you offset, they line up still. Well, no, I guess not.
No. I think they'll still bump. Yeah.
So if you're wanting to do things like that, you need to plan a turn ahead, probably.
Right.
There should always be plenty of help turns ahead.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but
Yeah.
I mean,
So you know, when I started this first year of this game, I played with people who are just naturally much better at thinking ahead than I am. And that's kind of why I got to know the rules and the inside outs of this game as much as I did, is because, and which leads to being able to run tournaments really well. But it's because it was my only advantage. I could not think that far ahead, but I knew all the little ins and outs and nuances of the game better than my opponents typically. But if you play it long enough, I'm certainly getting much better at thinking ahead than I was. But it's still not natural to me. We talked about using everything on the board to judge distance. Squad building theories. So let's talk for a little bit about what the dominant squads are right now, and the meta, and just how that comes about. Paul Heaver wrote an article back towards the end, right before Worlds last year, where he talked about the way that he builds a squad. And his basic tenets were, I'm going to first look at defense. How am I going to avoid getting shot? And then I'm going to build for offense. So how am I going to kill stuff, which again is the best way to avoid getting shot. And then from there, he went into how do you diversify your squad so that you don't have that hard match where, if you get paired against the wrong guy, you're just hosed because they've got the perfect counter to everything you've built. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you fly different ships, although sometimes it can. One of the things about the Dash and Corrin builds is they've got such different strengths that depending on which squad you're facing, you've got a really good answer to it. For these high agility arc dodgers, then Cornhorn is going to have a harder time with them. So I'm going to try and maybe use him as bait a little bit more, while Dash skirts around and shoots with his HLC. Or I know that if I've got Sunter and Whisper, they're going to try and, if I've got a heavy laser cannon on Dash, they're going to try and get in range one of me so that I can't shoot with Dash at them. And so I'm gonna use that knowledge to my advantage to have my super mobile ship used as the bait while Corrin Horn comes in and tries to take advantage of the situation. Reading your opponent and what they're trying to kill is really important. So sometimes you can fly the same squad though, and because there really is no Achilles heel, you just have to pound it to the ground. 4 blues and a Z95 is a perfect example of that. The counter to that is just keep shooting till it's dead. And they're really, you can block it, you can take actions out of it if you've got the kinds of ships that will do that. But it's really hard to counter. It's going to do well against a lot in the meta, especially if it can focus fire. That's pretty much a TIE Swarm as well. TIE Swarm is a little bit trickier in terms of its maneuverability, but so it does more of a block and strike technique typically, but TIE Swarms are hard to counter as well. And you look at the dominant lists right now. They're Corrin Horn and Dash. They're the Rear Admiral on the Decimator and Sunter, Super Sunter or Whisper. Super Sunter is push the limits, stealth, the title, and auto thrusters. So at range 3, or if you've got a turret, then it's extreme to say you might as well not shoot, but it's hard. It's challenging. So as you're building squads, I go back to what these dice look like to me, and what they tell me is, and this is just my play style, I like to I like the idea of trying to kill stuff before it gets to shoot at me. I like to take points off the board in a tournament because that's how I win. And so I'm going to build more for offense. But the other way you win, you got to kill stuff, but you've also got to survive in the process, right? So you still got to build for defense. So I lean a little more towards focusing on offense than defense than I got out of what I got out of Paul's article. But I think it's splitting hairs. I think you've got to focus on both and have a really good plan for both when you're squad building. Any other thoughts about squad building before we move on? No? Okay. So we've talked about asteroid placement a little bit, but so when you're thinking about, the new rules are that in a tournament you bring 3 either asteroids or debris, and it's the same 3 throughout the entire tournament that you use. But you put them in a pile, and your opponent puts theirs in a pile, and then you start placing based on initiative. So use that to your advantage. Do you want to see more rocks, or do you want to see more debris? Dash Rendar wants to see nothing but debris, because it's like open space to him. There's no effects of him being on debris, because debris gives stress, and you can still shoot on it, and you have to roll to see if you get a crit. But you don't have to stress or roll to see if you get a crit if you're Dash Rendar, because he ignores those effects. On an asteroid, he ignores everything except he doesn't get to shoot if he's still on it. So he doesn't want to see asteroids, he wants to see debris. But if you are running a control list with a lot of ion cannons and stress, then you want rocks, because ideally what you're trying to do is shoot one of these guys and stick them so that their next move is going to be on top of a rock so they can't shoot at you, and you've got 1 round of free fire on them the next turn. If they land on a debris, it's not as good.
Well, that worked out a lot better.
Let's see, asteroid placement also, so that's asteroid selection. Asteroid placement, it kind of depends on the squad. Sometimes it really doesn't matter. But if you see a 7-tie swarm, you want a cluster of asteroids somewhere around here, and generally speaking, you want to try and draw those TIE fighters into that cluster of asteroids, because TIE fighters want to stay in formation, and it's really hard to do that when you're flying through an asteroid field. You start losing formation, Howl Runner becomes less effective before you even get to the Alpha Strike. It's a mess. And so use that to your advantage. If you are a slow-moving ship, then you may want to actually have things more on the other side over here than on your side, because it takes you that much longer to get around them in the initial opening. It kind of depends on the squad that you're facing. Let's see. Again, if you kind of have a sense of where the battle's going to engage, then think about where the rocks are going to be there. So if you think that it's going to be over here, then that might be where you want to put your one that's exactly 2 away, so that if you're in a situation where you need a K-turn and get back into it, you can judge that distance. My personal preference is, because I'm usually flying a TIE swarm, I want those things as away from me as I can, and so and I want to affect what I'm fighting against in the most negative way. And so what I try and do is, if I see a bunch of ships, a bunch of small base ships on your side, then I'm going to set up my first rock so that it's 2 away and not quite 3 from your edge. And the reason I want to do that is that if you set up here and you're trying to come into the battle, it takes you that much longer to get past this thing than if I set it here. If I set it here, no problem. I'm just going to go right in. But this makes you think about it a little bit more and makes you work a little bit harder to get into the field of battle. And then if they let me, I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Or if, as the asteroid placement continues, I start to get a sense that I want you to set up over here, then I might give you a little more room so that you can set up your guys over here and kind of lure you into setting up over on this side. If it's a bunch of large base ships, like 3 fire sprays used to be really popular, then I'm going to cluster them as close together as possible, and I tend to do it on their side but towards the middle, so that again I know that they are going to set up either over here or over here, and so I'm kind of, as much as I can, I'm controlling where my opponent is setting up, and that's really important to me because I'm usually setting up academy pilots before anybody else before I get to see what my opponent's doing. So that control, as much as I can, is really important to me. Anything else about asteroid placement? No. Okay, so we talked through that about beginning ship placement. Let's see. I think that one thing I want to talk about is so it's very important in my mind to as I mentioned earlier, read your opponent. So one of the things that you want to do as you're reading your opponent is figure out what's their targeting priority look like. Who are they going to try and focus down first? How do I use that knowledge to my advantage? So I will oftentimes split up my squad so that I've got some over here and I've got 1 or 2 over here, and that's kind of regardless of the squad, just to give my opponent more things to think about. And then if I split up like this, and I see my opponent coming towards one particular ship, they seem to be committing towards one action, and they're going to try and kill that thing. Or if they just begin by setting up all their ships over here, and my backstabber's over here, I kind of have a sense of what they're likely to do. And so backstabber's probably going to slow roll it, and these guys are going to come in fast. If my opponent reads me and kind of tricks me and comes in, and takes advantage of that, there's all the mind games that go into that. But generally speaking, that's what I'm going to try and do. Is I always want my opponent to be thinking about as many things as I can possibly make them think about, because that's when they're going to miss something important. So the more challenges I can give them, the better it is for me. That's kind of why I think lists like, Trendon has been running the 3 named scum hawks a lot lately. And, one of the reasons that list works is there's so much to think about. So depending on what you're putting up against it, who do I focus on first? There's not really usually a good answer. And if there is a good answer, then he probably knows it, and he's going to use it to his advantage. And so, lists like, even lists like a standard TIE swarm with Howl Runner. I'm going to put Howl Runner, if I can, at range 3 with an evade in my Alpha Strike, and as much of the rest of my ships being affected by Howl Runner in range 2 as possible, because I want that Alpha Strike advantage where I've got 3 or 4 green dice to evade whatever you're shooting at me with, and I've put Howl Runner so that she's the least likely, or the least palatable target for you to shoot at, because I want her to, I don't care after 2 or 3 rounds. Howl Runner is just a nice to have, because the formation is usually broken up by then, and she's less effective. If you can keep her alive for 2 or 3 rounds, she's worth it. She's done her job. And that's the same for a Biggs list. That's the same for a lot of those where there's that turning point sort of ship that's the crux of your squad. I described it already a little bit, but I made reference in the event to the throat hug maneuver, and that's basically the same thing I just described. I've heard of squads of A-wings doing this, where it's like 4 prototype pilots and 2 green squadron pilots with push the limits. And I'm going to put a bunch over here and a bunch over here. I'm going to see what my opponent does, and then if they set up over here, these guys are going to go slow, and these guys are going to zoom in. And that's just kind of, so you just clench in on whatever it is that your opponent's doing. And there's you're going to get nice angles at something that way. Okay, blocking and baiting. So the lower the pilot skill, the easier chance you're going to have to block your opponent. Blocking your opponent so that you purposefully put your ship in the way of where you think your opponent is going to move, so that they run into you and they lose their actions. That's just about the only way you kill Suntra Fel, without ion cannons, right? So, I mean, even with ion cannons, you want to block them and then shoot them with the ion cannon. So blocking is really a critical piece of the game if you're able to do it. And TIE fighters are really good at it. TIE interceptors are really good at it. Anything that moves first is going to have an advantage of it. That's actually one of the pluses of the change that they made on decloaking to Phantoms now, so that you decloak before the activation phase even begins. So you can use that to your advantage and block where you think your opponent's going to go when you decloak, and then you do your move at the end. So that's the basics of blocking. Is you the more maneuverable ship and the lower pilot skill ship, generally speaking, the better a blocker it's going to be. And a 12-point Academy pilot is just, in my opinion, it's a phenomenal blocker, because I will throw that in front of BBBBZ and bunch them all up any day. And I know, I'm only not gonna get shot by the guy that I'm actually touching. The other 4 are gonna shoot at a defenseless Academy pilot that doesn't have a focus token. But I also know Academy pilots. I know they're going to take probably 2 or 3 shots because they're just jerks that way before they die. And when I finally lose it, he's soaked up all those shots and I've lost 12 points. Not the end of the world. Hopefully, I've used that. If I've done that, then I've used that to my advantage to set the rest of my squad up so that I could take advantage of the situation of them losing their actions. Baiting. So, if I'm flying a bunch of ships into the initial Alpha Strike, and let's say it's set up something like this, and this guy gets hurt. He's down to 1 hull. I got a couple of options that I can do with this guy on when it comes to movement phase. I can try and get him out of the way, so then he can kind of circle around and take maybe 1 more shot or 2 more shots before he gets focused down. If I want to actually have my opponent keep shooting at that guy, then I could do something like this. If I know that he's likely to come in here, take an evade, and just let him take a shot at me. And if he kills me, he kills me, and if he doesn't, that's great. But if I sacrifice this guy again to position all of these like this, then that's a win for me. That's worth the sacrifice. And again, with 3 green dice and an evade token, there's every likelihood that he'll survive. But so if you can keep baiting with a ship like that, that's down to low, and you see your opponent's just like, I got to take those points off the board. And the more points that ship is worth, I mean, you don't want to lose it the more points it's worth, but it also makes even tastier bait as it's flying away with its 1 hull. So your opponent is almost, it's like a magnet. They're just drawn to that ship. And if you see them committing to that, then use that to your advantage and just make them pay. All right, 2 more things. Actions. So I'm going to tell you what my thoughts are on actions. And this is like, do I take a target lock, or do I take a focus, do I take a evade? What do I do here? All right, so some basics. If the thing I'm shooting at still has shields, and I am going to get shot at, then I am likely to take a focus, because statistically, when I'm attacking, a target lock does just as much for my dice as a focus does. But a focus doesn't give me extra crits. A target lock might. I have a chance of getting more crits if I use a target lock and re-roll my dice. This will never get you another crit unless you have some special ability that turns hits into crits, or focuses into crits, but then you don't need that. So then, if I'm in the hull on my opponent, then I'll start taking those target locks. And the more hull that ship has, and the more damaging that a crit could be on that ship, the more likely I am to take a target lock. So, talking about target locks, there's certainly the advantage that if you take a target lock and you don't end up having to use it, or if you choose not to use it, then it stays. And that's nice to have. So maybe your Alpha Strike, you take target locks just because if you don't need it, then it's nice to have for, when you're at range 3, so that when you come in and you're at range 1, you can now have a target lock and focus, or if you get blocked, you've still got a target lock, so you've still got some offensive juice to use. So, I mean, everybody's kind of got their own way or their own philosophy to target locks versus focus. Again, this is one area where I tend to lean towards focus just because it's the balance. Yeah, I lose that ability to get a crit through. Yeah, if I don't use the focus, then at the end of the turn it goes away, and that's a bummer. But it also means that I'm going to survive more, and I like ships that are still alive. If I fly by, if this is my enemy and I fly by, and I know that I'm not going to get shot at that turn. Let's pretend that for a second that TIE fighters have the ability to target lock. Then I'll take a target lock there because I'm not going to get shot at, and there's no reason for me to take a focus. So unless I need to barrel roll to reposition or something, I'll just take a target lock so that I've got it around for the future. So that then I can do a K turn and be stressed, but still have that target lock handy if I've got a shot on the ship that's got that. But if I'm going to get shot at, usually I'm going to take an evade instead. If I'm rolling 4 green dice when I'm getting shot at, and I know that's what's going to happen, then I tend to take a focus instead of an evade. That's about where it evens out, I think, statistically. But that's where, especially even if there's a chance that I'm going to get to use that on offense, then I'm definitely going to take the focus. And at 4 dice, I tend to trust focuses more. Those clutch situations where you roll 3 focuses or 3 eyeballs and you've got an evade token. Well, that's great. I don't die as badly. So I tend to trust the focus more.
So you use 4 as the break point? 4 when you switch
4
to evade?
4 green dice is my break point. Yeah. 3 or less, like Power Runner at range 2, I'll take an evade. At range 3, I might think about a focus. I tend not to with Howl Runner because I want her to survive so badly. And if I've got a focus and she tends to shoot first, which is high pile skill, and I roll 2 eyeballs. I just don't even want the temptation to use the focus. Because she's there to augment all the other guys. She's not there to do damage. That's just like a bonus. All right, so...
Well, would you use it if you could destroy the ship?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, well, if I can destroy the ship and I think I'm not going to get destroyed in the process, Howl Runner is all about survivability. The longer she's around, the more annoying she can be.
That's Howl Runner.
Yeah. But you can use that, so people know that, so you can use that to your advantage too. My World squad, I had Predator on Howl Runner, because then she is an offensive weapon, and people don't expect her to be an offensive weapon. I would literally break her off from the pack. I think I did it twice, just because I knew that I was going to be able to get a likely kill with her, and your opponent will never see Howl Runner breaking away from the pack coming. All right. Let's see. Actions. Yeah, so we talked about actions. Anything else about like actions in general, cloaking, decloaking, any questions? We talked about barrel rolling. If there are any, let me know. The last thing to talk about is targeting priorities. So we've talked a little bit about it already, but if you are in a 75-minute round, and that's different targeting priorities than if you're in a 60-minute round. It's just 60-minute round. There's more pressure to take points off the board fast. You can't just like whittle down your opponent as much. If you have a high point ship, then that's going to act like a beacon to your opponent because they want those points off the board. Use that to your advantage. Certainly don't let them take those points, but use the fact that they're likely going to focus their fire on that to your advantage. I mean, when I'm in a tournament, the first thing I look at is what's the most expensive ship on the other side, and do I have a decent chance of killing it? And then I see where the setup is. Okay, am I still in good shape to kill it? Can I set up to feint as though I'm going to do something else, and then have the opportunity to swoop in and catch it by surprise? If you just go right at it, and it's a good player, they won't give it to you. They'll find their way out of that situation, especially if they've got a big ship with engine upgrade and barrel roll. I mean, they'll mess with your mind all day long. That's what they do.
They use it for me.
Right. Yep. So then the other targeting priority is who's going to mess with me the most. So that's not always the most expensive ship, right? So Sunterfell, that's one of the reasons that Sunterfell, Super Sunter, and the Rear Admiral work so well together. Is the Rear Admiral is a nice, big, juicy target, but you better not ignore Sunterfell, because she will take a ship out every turn sometimes, depending on what you're flying. I mean, it's kind of, my equivalent of that is, I showed it earlier, I tend to break Backstabber out from the rest of my TIE Swarm, and I do it for much the same reason. You can focus over here, or you can focus on Backstabber. If you ignore either, it's a mistake. So there's not a great option there. Anything else about targeting priorities?
Was she targeting for a Hawk or your Z95?
So the mistake that most people make is they go after the Z95s first. The Hawks are the bigger target there. The challenge is killing the Hawk, right? Because they're so overpowered. Yeah. Okay. So, any other targeting priorities?
Yeah, I said something about the Lambda. Good target lock on it.
Right.
And also transferring target locks.
I know.
Transferring target locks? Yeah, so Colonel Jendon, I think, is the guy that can take a target lock and then hand it off. So if you've got the ST321 title, you can take a target lock on any one on the board that's an enemy, and then if you've got a guy within range 1, Colonel Jendon allows you to pass that target lock to that ship, and you can do that even if they don't have a native ability to target lock. It's generally more tricky than it's worth, in my experience, but it can be, anything in the game can be used effectively in the right circumstances. Weapons Engineer, Weapons Engineer is a really nice upgrade, because then you get 2 and you can pass 1. If you're going to do that combo, but then it gets to be an expensive shuttle that can be focused down pretty quick. But you bring up an interesting point, which is using that. So if I've got Colonel if I've got the ST321 title, and I target lock a ship on the other side of the board, that ship now knows information about what I want to kill. Right? So maybe I target lock something that I'm not going to go after, and use my target lock as bait. to make you think I'm going to go after something that I'm not.
It's more of a mind game.
Right. And that's the same thing with target locks in general. The other thing is if I'm flying a swarm and if I'm flying whatever, and you take a target lock on my ship, then that's the ship I'm going to make sure is not in the arc of that particular ship in the next round. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that happens. Either get out of it or make that ship that's got the target lock run into me so that they can't shoot at me. Of course, now you'll use that to your advantage when we play, but that's okay.
Well, I guess you can understand like you're trying to break up the swarm so that, well, I'm trying to go after this one, but is he going to do anything? Is he going to keep the swarm and deal with it?
Right.
Or is he going to
That's really the. I mean, pretty much any squad that flies in formation, that wants to fly in formation. The trick is to get comfortable knowing when it is time to break that formation. Because at some point your opponent is going to make assumptions about you flying in formation and use that to their advantage and make you really hurt. Either by arc dodging and having a shot at you, like the Sunter build or a turret. Anything else? Other questions? All right. So it's 12:15. So if you have not paid if you're going to stick around for the tournament and you haven't paid yet, they're taking payment and names up front. Please put your name on there because that's what I'm going to use to populate the